Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all well. So in this video we are going to be reviewing Artemis Fowl, which is a movie that just got released today on Disney+. Its debut is on Disney+, something that should have been released in the movies on the big screen, having a big theatrical release, but instead is having its debut on a streaming service, Disney+, which is super exciting. So, you know, from that point of view, it's very exciting. However, the movie itself, unfortunately, is just incredibly disappointing. This movie franchise should have been so much better than it was, especially when the book was released all the way 20 years ago, and you know, they've had a very long time to release the movie, but it's just, you know, it's just really disappointing, especially when they've got such a good blueprint from Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, etc. You know, kids movie franchises that were books that are now becoming, you know, theatrical releases. They've got a lot of material and a lot of recipes, a lot of blueprints to follow, so it should have been so much better than it was. But Artemis Fowl is just an incredibly disappointing movie. So the main problems with Artemis Fowl is that it's got incredibly unlikable characters, really weak character development, a really childish tone despite it being a 20-year-old book franchise. It's very apparent that it's targeting the child market as it's just a very childish movie. It's got very confusing pacing and generally just feels very stuffed. It's trying to do a lot of things with still having a runtime of 1 hour 30 minutes. So, you know, a 90-minute runtime is fine, but it's just trying to do way too much stuff. It's trying to set up this whole world, introduce really bad characters, that have them doing boring, crazy stuff, and it's just trying to pack in too much, but it just doesn't really work. You know, the visuals, credit where credit's due, the visuals are the one redeeming factor. The visuals look absolutely incredible. So, you know, I'm sure they will do a sequel, and with all of the world setup that they've got, and hopefully all of the feedback that they've got for this movie, hopefully the sequel will be a lot better, because honestly, it can't be any worse than this. So in terms of the plot of the movie, it is firstly narrated by Josh Gad, who does a decent job and has the following 6 story strands. So the first one is all about Artemis Jr. being introduced as a very bratty teenager and him finding out more about the world of trolls, fairies, goblins and dwarfs. The second storyline strand is all about Artemis Sr. being captured and his life being threatened, and him being held ransom, and for Artemis Jr. to find the mythical item called the Oculus, which allows people to transport to different universes. The third story strand is about a fairy called Holly Short, who is also trying to clear her dad's name and redeem her dad's reputation, but she is captured and held for ransom by Artemis Jr. The next storyline strand is all about Judi Dench's character, Commander Root, who is trying to rescue Holly, trying to keep the fairy world from being undetected, and her position as commander is being challenged and threatened, so she's also trying to keep that intact as well. The next storyline strand is all about Josh Gad's character, who is being discriminated against because he is a tall dwarf character who is a criminal, so he's in jail. And then he goes on a bit of a Suicide Squad type mission in terms of he is able to reduce his sentence term if he helps Judi Dench's Commander Root character. And then we have the 6th and final storyline strand, which is all about the viewer finding out more about this mystical world of all these different creatures. So as you can tell, they are trying to stuff way too much into this 90-minute routine, and it would have just been so much better if they had just done less in the storyline strand. So in terms of the cast and characters of this movie, you know, they've got really decent actors attached to this project. However, I just feel like the vast majority of the cast just give really weak performances, and that's not necessarily the actors and the actresses' fault, because I feel like the direction they were given was just to be really childish and really comedic. However, especially in the first half of this movie, it just comes across as being very cringy. So first up we have Ferdia Shaw, who plays Artemis Jr., and he's not really a great child actor. His character is incredibly bratty, incredibly unlikable, thinks he's really cool, just has no real charisma, so overall, you know, is not really a great lead character. We then have Lara McDonnell, who plays Holly Short, whose character is 84 years old. This is another child actor, but this time, you know, she is a much better character who has better character development and goes on at least a little bit more of a journey than Artemis Jr. does. We then have Colin Farrell, whose character is Artemis Sr. This is a more better character as well, but you just hardly see him in the movie. You can tell that this character, you know, has a lot more depth, has an interesting backstory, but you just don't really see any of it throughout this movie. We then have Josh Gad's character, who is the narrator of the film, and he also plays the big discriminated against dwarf, and also the criminal that's in jail that then goes on the Suicide Squad mission. So, you know, his character is interesting as well. Very cringe in the beginning, but his character definitely improves as the movie goes on. We then have Nikesh Patel's character, who honestly is just cringy from start to finish. Every single thing that comes out of his mouth is really unbearable and very difficult to watch. So this is definitely an example of a character that was very cringeworthy throughout the movie. We then have Judi Dench's character, Commander Root, and her character is just very serious throughout the entire movie. So it's very difficult to kind of empathize with this character. And finally, we have Tamara Smart's character, who plays the sage slash butler in the movie. And you know, he probably goes on the most interesting journey throughout the film because he has the most emotional scenes in the movie. So it was nice to kind of feel some emotion slash empathy for this character. But equally, like with all of the other characters, there's just something missing, as the characters don't go into that much depth in this movie. So it's very difficult to kind of feel the emotion that you should feel for these different characters, because you just don't know that much about them, because the movie just doesn't allow you to kind of find out more about them, to have that trigger from the audience to the character on the big screen kind of set up. So that's a bit disappointing. And then on top of that, there's some characters that were mentioned that should have appeared in the movie that just didn't. So for example, the pixie that was shown in the trailers but was just nowhere to be seen in the movie. And then also Artemis's mother and Holly's father were due to appear, but they were just nowhere to be seen in this movie. So, you know, it's just a bit random in terms of, you know, those characters could have made these central characters a bit more fleshed out, or find out a bit more about them, and, you know, hopefully that would have made it a bit more interesting. But, you know, maybe they thought the movie is stuffed enough as it is, so they took these characters out of the film. But, you know, overall, I just feel like the characters and the cast in this movie are pretty bad. In terms of the visuals for this movie, you know, credit where credit's due, that does look pretty decent. So, you know, if you're just after a bit of a spectacle, you just want to see, you know, spectacular visuals, then this movie is definitely for you. And you can tell that all of the budget just went straight into the visuals, as it's just a shame that the rest of the movie just doesn't hold up. But yes, from a visuals point of view, this movie is pretty decent. In terms of other comparisons to other movies, Artemis Fowl is really the bottom of the barrel. In terms of comparing it to other Disney movies, you know, Disney produced some brilliant movies, and this just does not compare to any of them. So it's just such a shame that in terms of the Disney catalogue, this is just such a bad movie. And then if you compare it to other movies that were book adaptations, it's equally really disappointing. Like I said before, you know, if you compare it to Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, even Twilight, you know, there's so many better franchise examples in terms of turning them from books into movies. So this is just a really bad example of how to execute that. So in terms of comparisons, this is a really bad movie. Overall, I'm sure you can tell, I was really disappointed by Artemis Fowl. It's a really bad example of how to adapt a book into a movie. It had a really bad tone, really bad story narrative, and really weak performances, and I was just expecting a lot more, especially as it took over 20 years for this book franchise to be turned into a movie adaptation. So it really should have been so much better than it was. So for all of those reasons, I am going to give it a 1 out of 10. You know, the only redeeming factor is that it has decent visuals, but unfortunately, they're not enough to make this a worthwhile movie experience. I'd love to hear what you think, so please let me know in the comment section below. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you in my next video.